Abraham's Hebron, Then and Now, presented by Jeffrey M. Bradshaw in 5 parts. Part 4, Ancient Hebron. The purpose of this series is to provide a brief introduction to some of the places linked in tradition to the lives of the family of Abraham and Sarah. Many, though not all, of the sites we will visit are in or near the city of Hebron. Although archaeology cannot directly substantiate the scriptural stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it can tell us something about the geography, settlements, and daily life of their contemporaries. Learning more about these places helps us get a more realistic sense of the setting in which the patriarchs lived. It is hoped that this series of presentations will increase exposure to these sites, so rich in biblical history and tradition. In this presentation, we will visit archaeological sites associated with the ancient city of Hebron. Hebron is referenced 68 times in the Old Testament. The first reference is in Genesis 13:18, when, after Abram separated from Lot, and God promised to give him all the land of Canaan, he removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Hebron was already a flourishing Canaanite city by that time. Though Abram's presence would have naturally left little trace, biblical scholars still hope to find traces of King David's reign of 7 years in Hebron that occurred several hundred years later. David's son Absalom declared himself king in Hebron when he revolted against his father. Because of its strategic position historically and geographically, it became the second most important city after Jerusalem. This aerial photograph gives some idea of the geographical relationship between the major archaeological sites in the Hebron area. This to the right is the cave of Machpelah, the site of the tomb of the patriarchs that we visited in the second video in this series. 2 miles to the north is the traditional site of Mamre that we will visit in the 5th video. Near the middle is Tel Hebron, a large hill where the ancient Hebron was centered. Tel Hebron will be the focus of our visit today. 4 specific areas of interest that are part of Tel Hebron are shown at left. This map shows the current state of affairs in the partitioning of Hebron between the Palestinians, orange, and Jewish, blue, residents. The population of Hebron is about 200,000 Palestinians and an estimated 600 to 800 Jews. Most Palestinians live in the area labeled H1. Although Area H2 is a Palestinian-only area, it is controlled by Israeli Defense Forces in order to protect some 600 Jewish residents living in the old Jewish quarter. Because of a horrendous massacre of the Jewish community of Hebron in 1929, followed by other violence in 1936, the Jews returned to Hebron only following the Six-Day War in 1967, after the city returned to Israeli control. At that time, a new community, Kiryat Arba, was established on the east side of Hebron. Over the years, some of the old Jewish properties in the heart of Hebron were reclaimed with that government backing. However, in 1984, some Jewish settlers moved without government backing into areas near Tel Rumeda or Tel Hebron, the site of ancient Hebron. This brought new friction and the needs to separate the populations. The Jewish presence in the heart of Hebron was restricted to a single 1-kilometer-long street, according to the Hebron Accords of 1997. The areas bordering these new Jewish neighborhoods continued to experience serious dispute. The following video gives the perspective of a Jewish family that has reoccupied with government backing Beit Hadassah, the site of the 1929 massacre of members of the Jewish community of Hebron.
She was the first one born in Hebron, yes. I came here, was pregnant with her.
Ruth Hisme is a mother of 7, a Jewish settler and a true believer. So much so that although she could live anywhere in Israel, she's chosen to live on a front line between Arabs and Jews. 8 years ago, Ruth and her family moved to the West Bank, to the only Jewish community living in the heart of an Arab city.
The minute we arrived here, I felt very happy. But before we lived here, from far away, it seemed very difficult.
To an outsider, that might be an understatement. But for Ruth, just being in the kitchen in Hebron is an act of faith. Ruth and her family live in a Jewish fortress, guarded 24 hours a day by the Israeli army. In 1929, the building she lives in was the scene of a massacre. 67 Jews were killed by Arabs. The Jews left Hebron, but in 1968, after Israel won the Six-Day War, they came back. It's less than a kilometre from home to Ruth's work as a teacher. She says she's spat on and shouted at. But this is about the only road where she feels safe to walk at all. Hebron has about 400 Jewish settlers, half of them children. Their government has already handed most West Bank towns to the Palestinians, but the settlers remain one of the most stubborn obstacles to the peace process. To the settlers, staying in Hebron means fighting to save Greater Israel. To more than 100,000 Palestinians who live around them, getting them out means shaking off Israeli occupation.
Among the disputed areas in H2, which contains much of the old quarter of Hebron, is Shuhada Street. Hundreds of shops have been shuttered and most residents have left, creating a ghost town. The central section of the street is closed to Palestinian vehicles and pedestrians, except for a small handful of residents who remain. To cross one side of Shuhada Street to the other, residents need to go around the entire city center and pass through various checkpoints. The following video gives a perspective of a Palestinian family in the Tel Hebron neighborhood who lived across the street from a building with Jewish settlers.
That one was sticking on the soldiers.
احنا هون في تل رميدة في هون هذول للمستوطنين هذه كلها البيئة كلها مستوطنين هون فيش احنا تقريبا هذا الشارع احنا بنعدي منه بس عشان المستوطنين بيلطخوا من هون والجيش من هون يعني ما فيش احنا على الاربع جهات محاصرين تقريبا لانه فيش اي محل نطلع فيه يا المستوطنين بيلطخوا يا الجيش.
يعني بالعيد يعني قرايبنا بدخلوش يعني قبل 7 سنين تقريبا اجوا قرايبنا علينا كان في مستوطنين قعدوا يلطخوا عليهم حجار ويعني رفعوا عليهم الأسلحة كانوا بدهم يضربوهم بالأسلحة يعني احنا هنا عايشين زي كنا بسجن يعني.
هذا ما كانش فيه شبك هون كان كله زي هيك بس ضرب زين وهيك لما اجوا المستوطنين صاروا يدخلوا حجار على البيت حطت لنا اياه السلطه يعني انت اي فر كل الدار عندنا كلها عليها شبك انه المستوطنين اي محل بيشوفوا فيش عليه شبك بيطخوا لنا عليه هذا صار عشان محطوط الشبك يجيبوا مقص يوصلنا الشبك يعني هم بيضربونا هيك بيضربوا احنا الولد الصغير احنا ممنوع نلطخ حجر.
During our most recent visit in May 2014 to the location of the previous video, the residence of the Abu Aisha family at Wright seems to have been abandoned and shuttered. At left was a tall cement watchtower surrounded by a makeshift concrete wall and a neighborhood of broken-out windows. Our first stop on the visit will be Beit Menachem, a little below the summit of Jebel Rumeida. The name Rumeida comes from an Arabic term for ash, since many layers of ancient soil are found along the hillside. Ancient Hebron was a major Canaanite city, a settlement for Israelites, and for 7.5 years the royal city of David. Ruins of the site of ancient Hebron cover about 15 acres of the hill, called Tel Rumeida, or more recently, Tel Hebron. Beit Menachem, a residence for Jewish settlers, was dedicated in 2005. The neighborhood is called Admot Yishai, the lands of Jesse. Among the archaeological finds nearby were the northernmost walls of the city. This area is thought to contain the entry to the north gate of ancient Canaanite Hebron, predating the time of Abraham. The road at the far end may hide the ruins of the gate itself. This gate, or another on the south side, may have been the site where Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah to bury his family, the transaction having been witnessed by all who entered the gate. The wall at left and the steps to the gate were originally 30 feet high and are thought to go back 4,500 years to the early Bronze Age. The wall at right dates to the Middle Bronze Age, 3,500 years ago. David Wilder, a spokesman for the Jewish settlers, describes the significance of the site in the following short video.
In Hebron, and I start here intentionally. We start here for a reason. When we came in, we stopped by the tomb of the patriarchs. In Hebrew it's called Marat Machpelah. We'll go back there later. That site, I think probably everybody knows, is where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rebecca were all buried. However, a lot of times tourists come in and they say to me, it's nice to see the tomb, but where did they live? And that's why I start up here. This neighborhood has 3 names to it. It's commonly known as Tel Hebron. The word Rumeda in Arabic has to do with something like ash gray. There was a fire here a few thousand years ago and the name stuck. This is also called in Hebrew Admot Yishai, a name which I'll explain in a little while later. However, the third name is the real name of the neighborhood. This is called Tel Hebron. This is where Abraham lived almost 4,000 years ago. Now, up until a few years ago, we could just talk about it. Now you can actually see a little bit of it. Okay? If you take a look over here on my right, over here you can see all of these rocks here. This is a wall. Today this wall is 3 meters high. It used to be 10 meters high. So add another one and another one plus a little more, and that's how high it was. Over here, now this wall is, according to the archaeologists, was built between 43 to 4,500 years ago. 4,500 years ago, put it on a timeline, we're not going back to days of Abraham, I'm sorry, we're going back to days of Noah. That's when this wall was built. This wall over here on the other side is a little bit newer. This wall is only 3,700 years old. It was built during the days of Abraham. However, as far as I'm concerned, the most important find here are not the 2 walls, but what's in between them. You see these stairs. These stairs were discovered as you see them. Okay, nobody put them back together again. They're over 4,000 years old. The stairs led, going on the side of by the sides of the walls, up. Whoever was controlling the city could look down and determine whether they liked the guest or not. If they did, they'd let them in. If they didn't, they'd find a way to get rid of them. And the truth is that really the most important find here isn't what we see, it's what we don't see. Because if we kept going up the stairs, about where those soldiers are right now, the archaeologists say if they kept digging there in the street, right there, they picked us today. If they dug right up there where the people are walking, where Gila is right now, maybe she's going to go try to stop the airplanes. But if they dug right there, they think they would find the gates to Hebron. Now the gate, they don't know if it was an archway or if it was a double gate like this, but that's where they think people coming up the stairs from below would come up to the gate, they would open it, and people could go in. As far as I'm concerned, this is probably, even though there are no signs there and we walk there and we drive there, probably it's one of the most important places there is today in the land of Israel. Why is that so? Because if you go back and read in the Bible about how Abraham purchases the tomb of the patriarchs almost 4,000 years ago, you know, it says that he paid 400 silver shekels for that site. It was a tremendous amount of money. It's like $1 million today. And the amazing thing is that the guy that sold it to him, Ephron the Hittite, wanted to give it to him. He said, "Here, take it for free." And Abraham said no. Now, I don't know, somebody came and knocked on your door, you open it up, and they hand you the keys, and they say, "See outside that new BMW? That's yours, free." And you say, "Free? Nah, come on in. I got to write you a check." You got to be crazy, right? But that's what Abraham did. He said, "I don't want the keys for free. I want to pay for it." And he signed a contract, and he put 400 silver shekels down on the table. Why did he do that? Because he knew the site was so holy, and later when we go down there we'll talk more about that. It was so holy he realized that if he didn't pay for it, that one day somebody was going to say to him, you know, it really doesn't belong to you. We let you use it, but now we want it back. How can you make sure that never happens? Sign the contract, put money down on the table, and nobody can ever say that it doesn't belong to you. There are 3 places like that today in Israel. Joseph's tomb we paid money for. Temple Mount we paid money for. And the tomb of the patriarchs we paid money for. Okay? Abraham pays 400 silver shekels. Do you remember, though, where it says in the Bible that that transaction was carried out? It says, at the gates to the city gates. City gates are right there. It's very, very possible, maybe even probable, that that's where Abraham stood 3,700 years ago and purchased Marat Machpelah for the Jewish people.
Part of the archaeological dig is located directly under the Beit Menachem residence. Ruins of walls, a street, a residence from the early Bronze Age have been discovered. A 4-room house of a kind typical to Israelite occupation dates back 2,700 years to the time of King Hezekiah. A layer of ash provides evidence that the house was destroyed in the Assyrian conquest of 701 BC. Remains of grain silos and wine presses are also thought to date to earlier and later periods of Israelite settlement. Our second stop will be at the traditional site of the tombs of the biblical Ruth and Jesse. The image from an informative article by Professor Jeffrey Chadwick on the excavation of ancient Hebron depicts archaeological findings for the ancient Hebron city walls in the early Bronze Age, 2600 to 2300 BC, shown in blue, and the Middle Bronze Age, 1750 to 1550 BC, in red. At left within the walls can be seen the location of ruins of a church and monastery from the Byzantine and Crusader periods, called in Arabic Dir al-Arba'in. The rulers of the ancient city would have almost certainly built their residences at this commanding location on the summit of Tel Hebron. The Jewish community, which had welcomed visitors here since the Middle Ages, purchased the site in the early 19th century. Later, Palestinian residents of Hebron created a mosque at Dir al-Arba'in until the middle 1990s, when the entire area was declared a military zone closed to Muslims. The mosque was converted into a synagogue that memorialized the tomb of Ruth and Jesse. Here, a ladder to nowhere leans against a wall of the ruined church. The blue and white painted marker announces the tomb of Jesse, the father of David, and Ruth, his faithful progenitor. On Shavuot, Jews ascend to this place to recite her story from the Bible. Within the structure is a small, clean, and well-tended synagogue. Visitors will notice a strange structure directly atop the synagogue as they leave the site. Close inspection will reveal a military outpost. Here, a solitary soldier, glad for the current calm, passed the time looking at his cell phone. The outpost overlooked a no-man's land separating Jewish and Palestinian neighborhoods. Further to the south is the site of the Cyclopean walls. This drawing from Chadwick's article depicts the Middle Bronze Age II gate tower at biblical Hebron on the south side. Archaeologists excavated a 40-foot-long segment of the south wall. It was built of large field stones, some of which measured more than 3 feet long. The flat top of the wall may have supported a mud brick superstructure. The walls received the name Cyclopean, or giant, not only because of the large size of some of the stones, but also because the sons of Anak, some of the ancient inhabitants of the city, were reputed by the Bible to be giants. We will now visit a perennial spring on the lower eastern slope of Tel Hebron. In Hebrew it's called Ein Avraham, or Ma'ayan Avraham, the spring or well of Abraham. In Arabic it was known as Ein Khibra, or later as Ein Jadida, the new spring. In May 2014, the spring sat in the middle of a field, making it difficult to see and find. There were no prominent markers and no crowds. Beautiful olive trees, some reputedly 1,000 years old, cover the ruins of the ash hill of the ancient city. The grove is owned by a Palestinian landowner named Haikal. In 2011, 16 of these trees were destroyed in a fire lighted by Jewish settlers. The spring is reached by a series of stone steps. It seems to have been a water source for the ancient city. A thick wall inside the spring may have closed off an underground aqueduct that led from the water source to the upper level of Tel Hebron. The water is about 12 feet deep. On hot summer days, its clear, cold waters are a playground for children. In the spring, adults from the Jewish community sometimes use the site as a mikvah, a ritual purifying bath. Sadly, even this peaceful place has been the scene of violence.
I'm standing outside my aunt Abraham in Hebron, just underneath the Tel Hebron neighborhood. About an hour ago, there was an attempt by an Arab to kill a 60-year-old man who lives in Kiryat Arba. He was down here on the steps going down, and an Arab threw a rock at his head. He was found on his back just outside the water.
We close this visit with Hugh Nibley's description of the greatness of Abraham, an example for his age and for every age of humanity. Quote, Abraham was the essential everyman, but never was there a less ordinary individual. What office did he hold? We know of none. What miracles did he perform? What dazzling appearances? He lived in the heroic age, a time of great migrations, of epic literature, but we read of no mighty combats, blow by blow, or challenges boasting heroic genealogy. His 10 trials were every man's trials. He was in trouble in business. The grass, water, and grazing rights on which he depended were often withheld from him. He never drove a hard bargain, not even with the king of Sodom, or the generous Ephron the Hittite, who would have given him the burial cave for nothing. He yielded to Lot's greedy cattlemen and gracefully withdrew. His great zeal for the common good led him to plant trees and dig wells wherever his wanderings in the drought-ridden land led him, with no expectation of personal benefit, for the enjoyment of those who would come after. At Hebron, he ran a school for outcasts, where he received all comers. He always played fair. Charity was dead, and Abraham revived it, was a proverb. In our obsession with crime and Western scenarios, the central theme is always the pleasure of revenge, watching the bad guys suffer, inflicting exquisite tortures, if possible far surpassing those administered by the villain. Such vengeance was not for Abraham. Josephus tells us that Abraham stubbornly pleaded with God to spare the wickedest people in the world because he felt sorry for them, because they were his friends and neighbors. That is almost inconceivable to us in our modern Sodom and Gomorrah. It is compassion and forgiveness alone that are the unfailing traits of the true descendants of Abraham.